Welcome to the podcast of Data and Analytics in Business. We'll learn from the leading industry experts using data and analytics to solve the problems and create values in practice. We'll also learn where the industry is heading to and how data and analytics will shape the industry in the future. Most importantly, how they are preparing their business for digital transformation and disruption in the future. I'm your host, Jason Tan, and thank you for listening. In today's episode, we have Dr. Warwick Graco. Dr. Graco is the Senior Director of Operational Analytics at the Australian Taxation Office. As part of his career working in federal government agencies like Medicare Australia, he built artificial neural network and multivariate statistical model to help identifying fraud and abuse within the Medicare and Pharmaceutical Benefit scheme. During his career, he has also worked in Defence Department of Australia in the area called decision support. Over the years, he has also published a number of papers and books involving the topics such as defense, strategy, and analytics. Apart from that, he is currently the convener of the Whole of Government Data Analytics Center of Excellence and a special acquisition group of the Smarter Data program of the ATO. His current interests revolve around knowledge acquisition, unsupervised learning, and how to subspace population and do digital profiling. Warwick, welcome to the Analytics Show, and thank you for being part of this to share your knowledge and experience. I have done a lot of research about you, and I'm really excited to hear what you are about to share with us in terms of how analytics are applied in federal government for policy making and making Australia an advanced knowledge-based country. I thought I would start it light, which is with books, and you are no stranger to books. You have published quite a lot of papers and books. So among of them, do you have a favorite, and why is that particular one?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. The work I've done in identifying class structure has probably been the ones that have probably given me the biggest sense of satisfaction, but there's been a number of those done at various times over the years, and I couldn't really single out one.
What is this class structure that you were referring to? Do you like to elaborate that a little bit?
Yeah, one of the, there's different categories of objects and issues, etc., in the world, and the simplest example I always use to explain class structure is fruit. And you've got apples, oranges, and pears, bananas, if you want to toss them in as well, and they're all different classes of fruit, and each of them has a number of distinguishing characteristics, which you don't have to explain because most people know what those characteristics are, that discriminate, say, apples from oranges, from pears. And what I've been focused on has been how, methods you can use to identify the distinguishing characteristics of different classes in the population. An example would be, say, different types of customers or classes of customers out there. And what these techniques do is identify what are those discriminating characteristics of those different, say, types of customers in the population. And where class methods differ from traditional clustering methods is that put like with like when it comes to the profiles or the scores that cases obtain in a data set. In other words, what I'm saying, rows that have similar scores are placed in the same collection or cluster.
Yep.
What class methods do is, they're called taxonic methods, if you want another name for it, is identify the variables that define a category or class in a population. And, to give you an example, there's different classes of medical practitioner out there, particularly those who are GPs, and a lot of these can be identified without the need to use data mining methods to do it. But if you don't have prior knowledge of what those classes are, or what you don't know from knowledge and experience what they are, you can use these techniques to identify different classes of GP. And I can give you examples of where I'm coming from, because this is work that I did a long time ago. There's GPs out there that focus on what's called female health, and they tend to be female practitioners who deal with female patients for female problems, and they have a very, distinct set of attributes that define them. Another is geriatric specialists, that is practitioners who focus on the older population. Another is sports medicine providers who focus obviously on sports injuries that, sportsmen and women get. And GPs, even though there are still a lot out there that are very much family practitioners, in the sense that they cater for all different types of patients, there are increasingly GPs who are just because of choice and probably because of the type of market they're in, have chosen to focus on particular niche type patients, and hence, they've got clientele that have very specific type problems, and that's what they've specialised in. So within generalists, there are specialists, just as there are specialists within specialists. And by that I mean, if you take, say, ophthalmology as an example, within ophthalmology there are different types of ophthalmologists who specialise in different aspects of disease and disabilities with the eyes. These specialists are called hyperspecialists. They do this because they prefer to focus on particular issues with the eye and provide a niche sort of service to patients. And what normally happens within those specialties is that if an ophthalmologist is treating a patient and they know there is a particular ophthalmologist who's best suited to treat that patient, then they'll often refer that patient to that particular specialist because they'll know they'll get the best form of treatment to hopefully cure whatever the problem may be with that patient. Mm-hmm. And so the same is happening in the generalist world as well. Medical practitioners now are choosing more, not, like I said, I don't want to emphasise all, to specialise in a particular area because, they get a great deal of job satisfaction from what they're doing, and also that it enables them to keep up to date with what goes on in that particular niche type of area they operate. And also, they become known for being people you would go to if you had particular issues. So that's what's going on in the broader health area. But, we can identify those people provided we've got the right data and provided we're using the right techniques just by their defining attributes in terms of the types of patients they see, the type of services they provide, the type of procedures they perform. So there are statistical techniques out there, and I won't go into them because they're a bit hard to explain technically, that you can use to identify those defining attributes.
Yep. And I remember you spent quite a bit of time in the healthcare industry, and particularly in the Medicare Australia. So I think one of the views that you and I both share is that I want to jump to this question in terms of the domain expertise. So that is the view that you and I share, that domain expertise is really important. And it is about combining the domain expertise, understanding of the system, data, and the analytics to solve the problem with an elegant solution. However, at the same time, the other side of the token is that it's equally dangerous, in my view, that to put the domain experience as the most important requirement when searching for the right people to get on board in delivering a solution. So my question for you is, how should one take a good balance in hiring an analytic professional, or how one should take a good balance in getting the right people in terms of their domain expertise, skill set, and problem-solving skill without overemphasizing the domain expertise while equally recognizing its importance in the role?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's true that you shouldn't put domain expertise ahead of technical expertise because you're not going to get the person you want if you do that, and I totally agree with that view. But I'll quote a person I heard, and it wasn't all that many years ago, but it's going back at least 5, possibly more years, and he was a sort of like a chief data scientist at a firm in the USA, and it wasn't a major one, but it was still a sizable organisation. But he emphasised, he said it was increasingly important now that data scientists focus on getting domain knowledge, because without it, they're probably not going to function as well as they could, because you've got to be familiar with the issues that go on in that domain that you're working. And health is one domain, say finance another, agriculture's a third. So I define what I mean by domain. And it's knowledge that you just can't, within 5 minutes, gain just by, say, reading books and articles and even talking to people. It really takes a bit of time to get on top of what are the key issues in that particular domain and to come and to understand and appreciate how the people you speak to who are business experts as distinct from technical experts. By that, I mean they may be technical in their training, but they're talking about the knowledge in their particular area where they operate and why it is they make certain decisions and why it is they may go down a particular path with a particular issue, why they see certain things in the data that you and I would never see because we just don't have their knowledge. And so you don't have to have a deep knowledge of the domain, but you've got to have a reasonable knowledge of it to appreciate what people are telling you, why it's important, so that you can see it from their eyes rather than your own eyes what the issues are. So that's the reason I emphasise the importance of domain knowledge. But coming back to what you said, what's important technically, you're going to get different answers from different people depending on who you talk to, because what I've found from listening to many people is each individual, especially those who've got a lot of, say, experience under their belt, tend to emphasise things that they see as important, but others may not, and hence you're not necessarily going to get you'll get a partial consensus, but I'm fairly certain you won't get a full consensus across the board, across all, say, highly experienced practitioners about what they would collectively see as being the most important thing and then the second most important thing and so on. But I personally have always favoured their knowledge of machine learning and statistics as being the most important attribute or requirement, because I really believe that's why we are employed. You hear often you've got to be able to program, you've got to be able to do data processing, you've got to be able to have good business skills in selling what you do, and I don't dispute for a minute that all those things aren't important. They certainly are. But ultimately it comes down to picking the right solution to solve the problem. And to me, if you don't have the machine learning statistical, say, experience and expertise, I just really don't believe you are going to be able to contribute much. You may be a brilliant programmer, and that can be utmost in value in terms of achieving an outcome, but that's a means to an end. It's not providing what's required to actually get to the end. It's just enabling you to get to the end. And to me, you can always hire good programmers. You can always hire good data analysts. You can always hire people who've got the skills at selling whatever it is that's being done, even though those people aren't a dime a dozen. They tend to be hard to find. But there are other skill sets out there that can help you to make, cover the deficiencies or shortfalls that you may have in the skills that you have available to do what it is that's got to be done. And by that I mean if you take selling what you do, there are data journalists out there now and data artists who can really convert what's a lot of technical speak to business speak and make it very saleable, very digestible, and very much able to get across clearly to management what's being done, why it's important, and why they should commit to it. It's advantageous if the data scientists can do that, but not all data scientists are gifted in that way. And so, I don't want to go on because I'll be going around in circles, but to me, that's machine learning and statistical expertise. I really believe that's what we're paid to do. If we've got that, then we got what counts.
Yeah, I agree. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you're currently doing at the ATO and what business problem you're solving using the data and analytics?
Okay, what I'll do is first is give you sort of like a top-level level view of what we do, and there's no trade secrets here. We don't, a lot what I'm going to describe is already in the public domain. I'm not saying anything that's confidential or secret or it's going to compromise what we're doing, but the government funds us in two ways, and this is oversimplifying it, but I rather keep it simple rather than make it complicated. They fund us to do what's called task force work, which I'll describe in a minute, and they fund us to do more business as usual work. And business as usual work is what we have been doing for a long time and continue to do, and whereas the task force work is more specific to what the government wants attention focused on, and which they'll fund us for a specific period of time to do. Sometimes they'll extend that period of time because they believe there's value in doing that. Other times, once you reach that life expectancy date that's specified, then the funding ceases. But it varies from task force to task force, case to case. It just depends on what the issues are. But to give you examples of the task force work, there's the Black Economy Task Force that's been put together to develop solutions and to tackle the black economy. There's the, I think it's called the High Crimes Task Force, that's focused on people who have got money in tax havens offshore and haven't declared it as income. I'm talking about what's called the Paradise Paladin type papers that were in the media some time ago. You don't hear about it so much, but that work still continues. There's the Tax Avoidance Task Force, which is more to do with the big end of town and the fact that it's perceived that they may not be paying their fair share of tax. And there's a task force that is quite a large one that's been put together, and it's been in operation for a number of years to tackle that particular issue. And the fourth one, to my knowledge, is, and I have no idea what they're doing, but it's the superannuation one, where I think it's probably focused on ensuring that employers pay employees their right amount of superannuation. That's my surmising. I don't know, in terms of fine detail what it's doing. So that there's those task forces, and we have these task forces are multidisciplinary, and by that I mean it's people who have come from different sort of backgrounds who are involved in these task forces. A lot come from the business side of the ATO, but some come from the data science side, the analytics side of the ATO, and each of those individuals who are involved bring certain skills to the table, certain knowledge and experience as well, and between them, they just collectively within those teams, they come up with answers to whatever the issues are that they've been given to address. Coming back to business as usual, that's more like stuff that we do on a day-to-day basis, and this may surprise you, it's not all to do with compliance. It has in the past been to do with some compliance issues like, lodgement, paying, making the right sort of claims for, say, work-related expenses or for for rental properties or for investments. But the, some of the work's been on just what's called business process improvement, looking at how we function. Is there ways and means that we can do things better and more efficiently than what we have done in the past, where we're basically achieving savings from improving the way the business is done. Those savings aren't necessarily aimed at returning money to revenue or to the federal treasury. It enables us to free up staff instead of doing routine stuff, stuff that's fairly repetitive and probably not got a great deal of job satisfaction with it. We can redirect them to doing more challenging work that is more difficult, more complex, but requires a human to do it. We can't get a machine to do it, and therefore, we're getting better productivity out of them. They're getting more job satisfaction, and we're also contributing more to the public purse, which is what governments seek from all departments and agencies. So that's an example of where we've been focused. If you take my own area, where we've been focused historically, I'm not certain this will continue in the future, is that we've been more focused on understanding the customer, who they are, what they do, what issues they may have. Again, not necessarily from a compliance perspective, but just more understanding better who's in the Australian population, what are their, where do they live, what do they, like I said, what they do they have particular issues that are different, say, from other types of people that live in the Australian population. So getting that customer insight, the customer analytics sort of focus. We're always seen to be a regulatory agency, but the point I'm trying to make is that not everything we do is regulatory in focus. A percentage of it is, but not all of it.
Yeah, I think especially the highlight of the high crime, where the people hiding their money in the tax haven for the black economy and also the tax avoidance task force. I thought that's really, really interesting. I suppose from the public perspective, like a lot of people like us probably wouldn't know about this sort of thing exists in a way that where ATO play a role in trying to solve this problem. So that is really some great work that the ATO is doing. And likewise, the customer insight and the customer analytics. I just think that is probably one type of the analytic that pretty much 95% or all the business will always be involved, because every single business or company or organization will always have customer. And from the government perspective or the ATO perspective, it is no different. The customer is the people who is paying the tax, and perhaps the accountant who are helping these people to pay the tax. So it's important to understand the population and the issue that they face, etc., in terms of from the customer analytic perspective, in driving a better, what I call the revenue collection.
That's right. That's and it's also because all governments, regardless whether they be state, federal, or local, they're all under considerable pressure with their budgets, and anything that they can do to increase revenue, they're interested in, provided, of course, it's not going to create other unintended consequences for them. So, we play a major role for the federal government. 90% of the revenue that's collected at federal is done by the ATO. There are other agencies that collect revenue for government as well, but they do it on a minor scale compared to what we do.
Do you think that if we were able to move into a cashless society or economy, that a lot of the problems that you described earlier may be able to go away, and the government will be in a much better position in collecting the revenue, because as everything goes into cashless, it will always leave a digital footprint. And of course, there are people who will be smart enough to figure out how to wipe out those digital footprint or fabricate some of those digital footprint. But I feel like it could be a massive step forward and improvement should we be able to go into the cashless society.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I sort of, going back historically, I'm not involved now, but historically, at one stage, if you go back, say, 10 years ago, one of the questions that was on the tip of everyone's tongue was how big is the black economy? And I'm talking not only here in Australia, but across the board, globally in various other jurisdictions like the United States, the United Kingdom, and even places like China, just to pluck another example out of the air. And, you heard various estimates being quoted depending on which country you referred to, but no one knew for sure what the size of the black economy is in those various jurisdictions, with some, maybe one or two exceptions. Like the United States carries out each year a random sample of a very small percentage of the population, and it's probably a fraction of a percent rather than a few percent, and to confirm what they believe is the size of the black economy. And they've been very, trying to think of the right word, but very focused on this and very vigilant about doing it as well, because they have an issue that we don't face here in Australia, that they are funded each year by Congress, and Congress basically funds them on the basis of how much revenue they believe they can collect each year, and And so it's always been in the IRS, that is I think it's called the Inland Revenue Service. I might be wrong on the Internal Revenue Service, sorry. In the United States, they've gone out of their way to ensure that they can quote year to year what they believe the size of the black economy is, and for that very reason I've just described. But if you come to Australia, and I have no idea how big the black economy is. I know the tax office has done some sampling to try and establish the size of it, but just off the top of my head, I can't remember what figure they came to. But there's been much discussion, historically, what the size of the economy is, and what struck me is just how different experts vary in what they believe the size of this economy is. But one way for sure would be doing what you just described. I've always believed if we move from a cash to a cashless society, you're right in what you said about how people could avoid or evade being detected. But the thing is, I honestly believe we'd get a much better understanding of how much the black economy was costing the Australian government if we were to move to a cashless society. You're right that every electronic transaction leaves a footprint. A series of footprints leaves a trail. Those trails can be detected using modern technology. It would make it very hard for people to, or much harder, to hide or disguise those transactions, because there's other ways and means of working out what a person should be earning besides what's reported and what's detected. And therefore, it would put the government in a much better place to achieve an increase in revenue from all that money that's not currently declared because of the black economy. So I tend to be a strong advocate of going to a cashless society because of the reasons that you highlighted and the ones I've tried to highlight. I really believe it will overcome that problem. It could create others that we currently don't have, but it certainly, I think, would help nip in the bud the black economy.
I think that it will be ideal, like if we will be able to move into this cashless society. I suppose the key question that I will be asking is, how far are we away from moving into the cashless society? And often, I don't think it is fair to compare Australia to China in terms of the pace of moving into a cashless society. Obviously, China is at the forefront with the mobile payment, etc. But one of the analogy or one of the arguments that often I have read why China and how China has been so advanced is because they almost keep the entire generation and the infrastructure of the credit card and the credit card payment. They pretty much keep that, and because of that, it is much easier for them to move from the cash straight away into the cashless society using the mobile payment. So while it is not quite fair to compare to China, but I think from memory, Sweden or Switzerland, I cannot remember exactly which country, they seem to be making really good pace. Yeah, in the whole cashless society. So perhaps I feel like Sweden is a good example that we can learn what are the steps that are necessary that we need to take to be able to move forward. Because otherwise, the government is not trying to make a stand. It just never be possible to be able to move towards that destination of the whole cashless society and economy.
Yeah, I'm no expert in this area, and because it it gets into the issues to do with banking and overseas movement of transactions, and they're areas that I don't have any expertise. So I'd be speaking from ignorance rather than from having knowledge of those issues. But it's not going to be an easy transition in the sense that it's not going to be one without pain. But I honestly believe it's going to come, and it's probably going to come sooner rather than later. But I honestly can't give a date or a time how long it'll take to happen. I think the banks will play a role because it's already evident that from what I hear from other sources, that usage of ATMs is on the decline, that people are more and more moving to using credit cards and debit cards for transactions, and especially the younger generation, like I'm just watching my two sons, and they're very much at the forefront of using all the latest and greatest ways of doing, what we could call commerce, online commerce.
Mm.
And I think what's probably holding us back, and I'm not being critical here, it's just a generation issue that the older generation are not as technically or computer savvy as our younger generation.
Mm.
And we've got to cater for both. We've got no choice on that. But as the older generation decline in numbers, I think that'll accelerate the move to a cashless society, and it's inevitable, in my opinion. A few legislative changes will probably be required, because if the governments don't take the right measures, then people could be paying very hefty fees for cashless transactions. And I'm led to believe, and you may have better knowledge than me here of this issue, that cashless transactions cost banks virtually nothing compared to other types of transactions. So there's obviously scope there to reduce, the fees and charges without necessarily causing a great problem to profits, etc. But again, I'm not the best person to speak about this, because I'm the first to put my hand up and say, my knowledge of these issues is very superficial.
No problem at all. I think it's still good to hear what is your thought from the ATO perspective, or in terms of the revenue collection, and how that whole movement to the cashless society will make such a big, massive impact to the revenue collected by the government, and the more revenue they collected by the government without having to penalize the population with a higher percentage of the tax. I think it would just do good for the country and the population. I want to come back to the customer analytics works that you mentioned earlier, and I know you have an interest in the digital profiling. Are they the similar type of thing, or are they the same thing?
They're like a complementary, they are. You call it profiling is more about individuals, and when I use the word digital profiling, I'm talking about it used in a very or a number of specific ways, and I'll give you an example of it. If you're trying to identify people who are going to be a security risk, no matter where they work, it doesn't have to be the ATO, it could be anywhere. Digital profiling allows you to go in and attempt to identify what would make those people visible in data. And it's about defining attributes that make them visible, behaviours, and what I call proxy measures, or proxy indicators is probably a better way of phrasing it. By proxy indicator, and this is a field that's very much at an early stage in its development, but it's going to mushroom and it's probably going to require some legislative protection as well, because it could soon spiral out of control if legislative sort of protections aren't put in place. But what I'm getting at is there are indirect indicators that can be found to be statistically associated with certain types of practices, certain types of behaviours. And I'll use a fairly innocuous example here. If we knew what TV programs you're watching, what books you read, there's a fair chance we could infer which political party you vote for.
Yep.
You wouldn't have to tell us. We would just know by the pattern of what you read and what you watch on television as to which way you're likely to lean. That doesn't mean we could predict who you're going to vote for in each election. It just means we know which way you're more inclined to vote rather than will vote, because there could be various issues arise that could swing people's votes from one direction to another. But we know who would be a safe driver from what they watch and what they read. We know who would be a risk of not repaying their loan. If we knew what their proxy indicators, there's research being done on mobile phone usage, where they've found that depending on how you use your mobile phone, it can give a very strong indication whether or not you're likely to be good at repaying your loans or your debts versus someone who won't. And I see this as being a new and exciting field. What I've been focused on is not so much doing the profiling yet, is just getting the tools and techniques to do it. and we're getting to a point now where we've got those tools and techniques. I'm talking, from a data science point of view. But, you've got the major internet service providers like Facebook and Google, etc., and, they're profiling us 24/7 by the way we use our those services provided by those service providers. And I noticed with one particular service provider I use, not one of the ones I've mentioned already, but they customise the material I see based on what they know about me as an individual and my interests, and they're pretty accurate in what they provide me because they've got my interests down pretty well. They've got a very accurate understanding of my interests, I guess is the best way of putting it. And they're not doing anything nefarious or unacceptable. They're just like any good service provider. They're just understanding their customer and providing what the customer wants.
Correct. Do you think this digital profiling is something that can be used within the ATO for whether it's revenue collection or whether it's the Black Economy Task Force in better understanding who the people are and make them visible in the data and hence improve the quality of the outcome?
I'd have to say yes, because it's a much bigger issue than just people's tax obligations. I can see it being used to identify those who are likely to breach court orders when it comes to husbands estranged from their wives. We've had some here in Canberra, I think there's been 2 really shocking cases of where the wives were murdered by their estranged husbands. And I believe we could do a better job with the technology we've got now. And I'm not criticising the police in any way, shape or form. They're trying to do the best with what they got. But I believe the technology is getting a point now where we can be more certain about who's likely to breach those orders and to ensure that they are monitored more closely than those who are, say, a lower risk of doing it. When it comes to, like I said, people who could be security risks, I believe we're getting to a point now where we can identify them with far greater precision than what we've been able to do in the past. When it comes to another example, say people who are insurance risks, we can do it. I can see it being used right across the board, say with education. I mean, this is already happening in education. Unknown to a lot of people, they're already not so much profiling students, but they're being able to predict now who's going to do well, who's not going to do well on courses. They can identify in what areas they need assistance when it comes to the learning and development that occurs. It's just becoming a much more sophisticated world that we're living in, and the biggest challenge is keeping up with what's happening rather than what is happening, because it's just going forward with such speed, and it's the velocity is unreal. Yeah, I can see it being used universally across the board for virtually everything you'd care to name. Who's going to be a good profitable customer for a supermarket chain or a bank. That's already happening. I mean, that's not new.
Correct.
Just be used in such many different and diverse sorts of ways. But coming back again, I really believe the legislation's got to catch up with this, because the Cambridge Analytica Facebook sort of scandal, where people's data was used without their permission, just brought home how we need to have, the right protections in place to ensure that people's data is not being used in a way it was never intended, and it's going to be detrimental or harmful for them for the wrong reasons. I mean, in some cases it might be harmful for them for the right reasons, in the sense it's going to protect the broader community from those who would do us harm, like terrorists is another example. But yeah, just ensuring that, we all play by the rules, and the rules are fairly clearly defined, and don't leave anyone in doubt as to what can be done and can't be done, because in government we have to play by the rules. If we don't, it undermines the community's confidence in government, and no government, when it comes to the political side of the fence they come from, wants the government, confidence in the government to be undermined in any way, shape or form. They want the opposite to happen, that people believe in and trust and will support government at what it does.
Yep. While we are on this topic of digital profiling, I want to move the topic to a bit of a overlap in about psychology. I know you have an academic background in psychology, and also you play a consulting role in the Psychology Board of Australia. I suppose my question to you is, and also before I say that, my question is, I always think that a lot of things that we do are fundamentally driven by the psychology and driven by the human, and it's important to understand why and what is driving them to make that sort of decision and behave in certain way. So I suppose the question that I have, that brings me the question is, how important do you think that the analytic profession, they should take into the account the human behavior, or anyone whenever they are solving any problem using data and analytics?
You happen to be talking to a person who's a firm advocate of using what's called psychographic data, and I don't know if you're familiar with that term, psychographic. It's commonly used in the marketing world.
Yep.
And, they've been users of that type of data now for a long time. And, they use it to understand the different type of customers out there in the population, and have used it quite successfully. But I believe, coming back to Ian Opperman yesterday when he's talking about what's going on in the New South Wales government, and Ian's a very good speaker and has is a very dynamic data scientist in terms of what's being done in government in New South Wales. But, the way he was talking about joining a data and how they can use it for many important purposes, like they're talking about, I've got the term, jargonish term he uses, but it's basically kids who from broken families, and they're fostered out to other families to be looked after, and how they're trying to get that right so that these kids aren't abused and missed and subjected to violence and other things when they're put in foster homes. And I think every government in Australia, no matter which level you're talking about, would love to have a system that can reduce the risk of that happening when it comes to those sorts of issues. And to me, the more we can join data, the more we're going to see, because it's becoming a truism in data science that the more you enrich your data, the more you see. And to me, adding psychographic data into that mix is going to make the data even more richer than what it probably is with the other data that's joined. And it's just going to make you see things that previously you're blind to. And I've had a lot of experience using psychographic data, not from a marketing sense, more from the sense of knowing what it can do and can't do when it comes to psychological profiling. And I know for sure that we'll be able to make far better predictions about who would be an observant or what you call a dutiful taxpayer compared to one who's not likely to be dutiful. We'd be able to do it with far greater precision than what we can do now. We'd also know which taxpayers are going to have problems, not because they're not dutiful, but just because of other reasons. They're reaching a certain point in their life where they're going to have a change in circumstances, so we can hop in before they reach that turning point and help them to make that transition, and also ensure that they're not going to do something which is going to cause problems for them further down track, where they've got to, say, repay taxes that they should have paid not because they tried to avoid or evade paying those taxes. They just didn't realise they had that obligation. And our aim is to prevent rather than cure, like most organisations have that sort of approach. And the more we can prevent, then everyone's happier as a consequence. So I believe we've got to see this as a process where we're joining all data that we can legally do to join, and psychographic being part of that, but also a lot of other type of data as well, so that we get a richer and a better understanding of the people we serve. So I'm a firm advocate of it, but there are many problems at present getting hold of that data. I won't go into them. There are far too many, but I can't see us using it for some time yet, because I think some of the legislative issues are probably going to have to be addressed first, and also there's just problems, difficulties getting the data using existing sources. And one thing I haven't mentioned, which you may be aware of, is the technology again is moving with such velocity that we can't keep up with it, but we can actually tell from what people say and write now what their personality is, what interests they may have, what their attitudes are, what their intentions may be. And it's just simply by having the technology to analyse what they write, say, in emails, what they put in tweets, what they put in Facebook entries, what they put in, say, presentations they do, what documents they write. That technology is already here. It's not futuristic. It just hasn't got a wide adoption yet. It will increasingly be adopted and be used. I expect in the next decade or so the uptake will increase quite dramatically. But again, we've got this problem. The legislation's got to catch up as well, where the technology's at.
Yeah, I think from the data scientist perspective or from the analytic perspective is if we can set aside the privacy issue, if we can set aside the registration issue for 1 second, the more data that we can collect and join together, the better it is. And I suppose the challenge that I feel like the policymaker will have to face over the coming years is how do they make that balance in giving enough space for people to collect and use and join the data, but at the same time protecting people and protecting how the data are being misused in the case like the Cambridge Analytica. And that fine line and that balance is gonna be really hard. I'm not sure what is the best way to do it. I suppose maybe perhaps the best way, I'm guessing as we see, is that the best way to do it is they probably just need to have more of the analytic professional like you in the government to help them, guiding them in making the right decision to that is balanced while not over restricting the use of the data.
Well, the Cambridge Analytica and Facebook issue was like a bombshell that, in terms of its consequences, and I'm talking right across the globe, not just here in Australia, in that it really brought to the surface, how important it is to put in place the right protections. And I know, I can speak for the federal government, and because I'm involved in some of the discussions, there is a really concerted effort being made now to come up with a set of ethics, like the medical profession has a code of ethics, the legal profession has a code of ethics. They're aiming to come up with a code of ethics, and they're well advanced in doing this for those who practice in the analytics space. The confidentiality, the privacy, the security issues with data is certainly being addressed, and progress is being made. And there's probably at some point, I don't know when this is going to happen, but I'd say it's not too far away if I had to make an educated guess, when legislation will be introduced to Parliament to affect some of the changes that are being recommended by these various bodies. And these bodies aren't just made up of people from one department. They're made up from representatives across many departments and agencies. That will be put to government, and government will make the decisions on what they will legislate, what they won't legislate. But you can bet your bottom dollar that they're going to be putting in some protections. They're not going to be sitting back not doing nothing. But one of the cornerstone issues, and I've heard this from others, so this is not coming from me, but is going to be this really ticklish question about who owns the data. Because there are some people, and these people are in the data science space, who believe quite emphatically that the person that data refers to should be the owner of the data, not the person who produced the data. I know that's going to create all sorts of arguments for and against that particular point of view, but at some point, who owns the data is going to have to be addressed as well, because that to me is really going to be one of the key issues that decides how data is used in the future.
Right. Yeah. It seems like that has been a lot of work being done in the background at the federal level to understand, to regulate how the analytic professional will be using this data and making sure protecting the citizen from the misuse of the data. So that's really great to hear. I actually wasn't expecting this will come out. That to bring to me, I suppose, the last question I have is, it seems like that has been some major recognition that by the federal government that data and the digital is going to play a big, massive role in the in the future, and they are trying to their absolutely best to use this data to play a role in the policy making. Is that a fair way to say that?
It is. The current government, I'm keeping politics out of this, so anything I say is not going to be politically motivated. But yeah, no, they've recognised that data is going to play a key role going forward. I think where we're probably lagging behind a little bit, say the state governments, and I assume other state governments like Victoria and Queensland, just as two examples, are probably trying to catch up as fast as they can with New South Wales and the way they're using data. We are not as advanced as the state government, particularly New South Wales, the way it's using data. We've got some catching up to do, to be honest. But that will happen. I'm not trying to be pessimistic about it, but I really think we've got to probably, I'm giving you an opinion here, so don't take this as a statement of fact. I really believe the government's going to have to address whether or not it goes towards establishing what I call a data fusion centre. That is a centralised data fusion centre that services all government agencies and departments, but this centre would be the one that basically collects, joins, cleans, and makes certain the data is curated, and that would be all data, data that those behind what I call the Chinese wall. And I don't mean China when I mean the Chinese wall. I'm talking about those who are, I can't speak about what they do. I'm not allowed to, but I know, there's certain agencies that have significant powers when it comes to data, and they use it for all different purposes. But I honestly believe we need that central fusion capability to do it, because I think that's the only way you're going to get economy of scale. And that is not on the radar at present, but I have spoken to other people in other parts of the bureaucracy, and I haven't heard anyone yet, disagree with that point of view. And I'm not saying there aren't people out there who don't disagree, there probably are, but I just honestly believe that that's an issue that the government at some point in the future is going to have to address. I believe that while we've got the Bureau of Statistics, which performs a very important role, that either that agency or another agency will have to be put together to basically serve the government. I'm not talking about taxation here, or say human services, or what do they call now, Service Australia. I'm talking about an agency that basically digs the eyes out of the data for the government itself on all issues, and gives the government insights that will help guide both policy making and the programs, and even the way portfolios are organised as well. When I use the word portfolio, I'm talking about health, I'm talking about defence, I'm talking about education as portfolios. The programs within those portfolios, how they are managed, because I reckon if they started getting a holistic view of a lot of these issues rather than, say, a departmental view, and again, I don't mean that in a political sense, I mean that in the sense that portfolio obviously going to give a portfolio view, because that's what it deals with, that they'll then be able to make better decisions about how they want to service the population, what services are provided, and also where they're going to get the best bang for the dollar in terms of the money spent, because at present, a lot of it's guesswork, some of it's not, but they don't always know for sure where they're going to get a really good return for the money that they do spend. And getting on top of that, I think would be to everyone's benefit, and I believe either the Australian Bureau of Statistics or in an expanded sort of form or another agency is needed to do that for government. It's not happening yet, but that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I think when you were talking about that whole central repository where we can pull all the data from different departments so that people will be able to access and use the data in more of the holistic view, I actually think that Queensland Government is actually making a good progress. So they currently have an initiative of trying to bring all the departments together, all the departments of the Queensland Government together to share some of the works that they do and also the data that they use in the hope that people will be able to be more analytic and better use the data across department rather than just duplicate, but also getting that holistic view. So I think the Queensland Government actually is doing a pretty good job. It might take some time to get there, but I feel like they are absolutely heading to the right direction.
Yeah, I get that impression from where I sit too, and your knowledge is better than mine. But, bits and pieces I hear coming out of Queensland suggest to me that they've certainly got the right approach here. And there's a friend of mine, I'm trying to think of his name, he was the Chief Information Officer of the Queensland Government. He might, if he's still there, he might be one of those leading the charge on that.
Yeah.
He might have retired by now, but he and I worked together many years ago.
Yep.
And he's a good thinker. He's a positive sort of person. I always have a lot of time for him. And I think the state governments are really embarrassing the federal government at present with the progress they're making on use of data and analytics.
In that case, maybe they deserve to get more funding from the federal government to have them advancing the use of the data and analytics, and perhaps they can come back to have the federal government to do some of those work.
We'll catch up because everyone copies everyone else, and once our political masters here realise that maybe government X is way out in front of the federal government, I think that'll be the what do you call it, the cue for them to ensure that we catch up with the re-election of the Morrison government. They made the decision to change the name of the Department of Human Services to Services Australia, and that was based on the New South Wales model of they're using. So, it's an example of where we are following what the states are doing.
I'm going to try to end this interview by asking you one last question. What is your favorite book for the last 12 to 34 months?
One I really enjoyed reading, and it was a very good book, was the one by the two MIT academics, and I think they're economists, on the second machine age. I really enjoyed that book. It was a very good piece of scholarship. Eric, I can't pronounce his name. He's got a European name, Brill Jofferson, something like that, and Andrew McAfee was the other author. And I really found that book very informative, very forward-thinking, and really a signature book about where we're going with technology, and because they call what we live in now the second machine age or the fourth industrial revolution, depending on which term you prefer to use. And to me, that was, for all the books I've read, that was a really, a book I got a great deal of enjoyment out of reading.
Great. I haven't heard of that book before. I'm going to check that book out. I'm due for another new book. I just finished one, so that's a great book. Thanks for sharing. So thank you so much, Warwick, for coming to the show and sharing some of the works that you do at the federal level for the ATO, for the Medicare Australia, and also the Defence Department of Australia. I just couldn't thank you enough for all the contribution that you have made for the country. So I really, really appreciate that. Thank you.
That's all right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Warwick.